I'm Alfonso Winker.
And I'm Trina Olson. And together, we're the co-founders of Team Dynamics.
And this is Behave. Hi, friends, and welcome back to Behave. Trina and I want to layer on to the conversations we've had about the election cycle, movement building, and the ways in which workers are voters and voters are workers. They're not mutually exclusive, and not every worker is a voter, not every voter is a worker. But we want to talk about this intersection of people who are going to work at your workplace, who are experiencing this particular election cycle. Trina and I, as folks who are total nerds about social justice, about movements, about advocacy, and the ways in which elections are a piece of broader movements for justice and liberation, we are both hopeful and pragmatic. Trina can often be quoted as saying she's won just enough to remain hopeful for the change and lost just enough to be realistic about what's possible. We are in a longer arc that has electoral and social movement activity that precedes the current moment that we are in, and that is propelling forward the moments to happen after Election Day. So we know that federal elections are singular moments that can be galvanizing, that can be devastating, and that play into a bigger picture. And there's short and medium and long-term ways in which social change happens. And we lately have been talking a lot about anti-racism as a lifestyle. So the invitation is to move from singular answers to the holding of multiple truths, not to tamp down or be deniers about how the outcome of a particular election or the conversation around particular candidates, issues, or identity groups is happening, but to help us situate ourselves, get our proverbial feet on the ground, take a breath, and understand what moment we are inside of, knowing that we absolutely will have to grieve or celebrate on the other side of Election Day. And then we will have to ask ourselves, what preceded this to make this happen? And what are we being propelled into? And so, Trina, I want to have just a short conversation with you. You've been in 18 different cities working on dozens of different issues that were on the ballot that had a direct impact to workers' lives, to LGBTQ people's lives, to elders' lives, to trans people's lives, to young people, so many communities that we care about. And so you know what it is like to have lost and then hold the sort of gravity of what it feels like to believe that something good, that we're sort of going to turn a chapter and something good is going to happen for our community, and to watch the momentum build and then to not win, and then watch what it is like for people to return to work that day with the truth of, I thought this community cared about me, and sort of wondering, what does that mean for me as someone who's showing up in my workplace and in my community now that the vote has landed in a way that suggests to me I'm maybe not as important as I thought I was in society?
Yeah, I keep remembering with just sort of vivid detail election night in 2004. I was in Seattle, Washington, and we were working to turn out voters after I had spent months as a canvass director working hard to register over 50,000 low-income voters and voters of color to vote in a highly segregated city where we registered at bus stops, at parks. We were talking to mixed immigration status families who were afraid we were immigration when we came and knocked on the door. So we had really had this big sprint right at the end. And the results on election night in 2004 in a lot of different parts of the country and a lot of different parts of Washington state were really mixed. And I remember it was made clear and it got called that George W. Bush had been reelected as president. And we were in an auditorium, and especially some of our youngest activists got really upset really fast. And it was, oh my God, we did all this work and it didn't do anything. And we have this clear agenda and it feels so logical and it's based in science and it's about the care and humanity of our community, and it didn't work. And there was a regional director who was the boss of my boss. Her name is Heather. And I was sitting in a folding chair in this auditorium, and she came up behind me, put her hand on my right shoulder, put her mouth down to my ear and said, Trina, they're watching you to see how you react. And what she meant was the canvassers that were part of my team. And I just thought, oh shit. And she didn't tell me what to do. She didn't say, be stoic, right? Don't be emotional, pretend everything's fine. Like she didn't say anything other than just like, Trina, remember, you consented to being a leader, right? I went into that room and interviewed for that job to be a canvas director. I picked it. And so she just reminded me that I had a responsibility to help folks hold the reality of the new context, right? And the truth is, a month later, we had learned that our work knocking doors for the last 2 weeks was the difference that made the difference in a progressive governor being elected. She won by less than 200 votes. I mean, it was wild. And so the idea that most elections have mixed results, if we are looking at our school board, our Parks and Recs department, our city council, our local electeds, our state houses, federally, our courts, a lot of folks vote on law enforcement, judges, right? There's a lot happening. And I think when I think about the impact on worker wellness, the first thing I had to learn how to do as a leader was to receive and believe the pain that other folks were in because of the depth of disappointment and fear of what had happened. And it was not my job to make it small, to diminish the reality, and to pretend everything was fine and to do some weird Pollyanna dance. It was my job to say, God, we did work so hard. This is so disappointing. Like you, I'm now nervous when I'm at a grocery store of who likes or dislikes LGBT people, about who is for women's rights and who is against them, who really thinks about what our community needs or is coming from a very hyper-individualist perspective. It can feel like we sort of cracked as a society and we're just on sort of two sides of this fissure. But I think for me, now that I'm looking at it more than 15 years later, that really served as a foundation for me to recognize as a leader that my commitment is to keep trying. So I'm not going to win every time, but I'm not ever going to sit it out. And I'm not going to pretend that it's somebody else's job to try to move the needle. My job is to say, well, I did what I could in my control. So right now I'm at a different point in my career where I can give different kinds of money. I have different kinds of followers or listeners, or I lead different people. But I think worker wellness, we should not underestimate the actual trauma our workers are experiencing when people who have dehumanized them are in charge.
So let's take a quick break, and then I'm going to ask you about practices from managers who are getting fired up about what you're talking about.
Why can't you behave?
Welcome back. Trina, I'm curious. You told this amazing story about your colleague, Heather, and how she reminded you that folks were watching you. And I think there was so many things that I felt like were important about that moment. One is that she didn't ask you to behave a certain way, but she was reminding you of that leadership opportunity. And I think managers the day after Election Day are going to be asking themselves, if I'm being honest, there were some mixed results last night. And what I know to be true is the following about the race, gender, and other aspects of identity mix on my team. And so what are some practices, Trina, that managers who are acknowledging the truth of mixed results, who are acknowledging the truth of the race and gender makeup of their team, who are understanding that folks are watching how they show up and acknowledge the moment, what are some things that people can do to sort of be ready for the day after? And what are some things that they might do for themselves?
Okay, here's a weird list in no particular order. Let's see how it lands. Here's what I've been thinking about. And so as a person who has positional power, meaning I manage some people at our organization and I have certain kinds of decision-making authority, I am reminded that it is my job as a leader to practice empathy, not sympathy. And so when I think about what that practice has looked like, It is, what is it like to sit with somebody? That could mean virtually. That could mean on the phone while you're taking a walk. That could mean over your Slack channel. But to spend time and be with somebody, not absorbing their pain and adding it to yours, not pretending you understand when you cannot possibly, meaning I've only ever been in my body. So if I start saying things like, oh, I understand, and you're like, yeah, I'm a brown man. I'm like, oh, I don't understand. Right. So I'm pretty careful now with what I say, but for me, empathy is the practice of being with somebody and being the non-anxious presence that is able to say, wow, you're mad, you're scared, you're heartbroken. In my life, for real, I have been mad, scared, and heartbroken. So I don't know how this impact feels for you, but I know that feeling. And so I want to just be with you while you're sharing that, knowing that there aren't consequences. So for example, because you're crying during a work day does not mean I think you are less intelligent, capable, or worthy of my respect, right? It's not going to change how I think of you and your abilities. So many of us have been taught that feelings are naughty and that our feelings and our instincts don't add value to our work. And that couldn't be less true. So I think empathy over sympathy, right? And the quick way to say that is sympathy is I'm so sorry that's happening to you, but I'm pretty glad it's not happening to me.
Right.
And empathy, I'm saying this as a non-mental health care professional. So here's my layperson sort of definition. And empathy is you are heartbroken, you are sad. I can connect with that and I can sit with you while you're in it so you're not alone. And that might mean me being quiet. It might mean being repeating back what you said. It might be me asking questions, but just being with you in that and not trying to fix, amplify, or minimize what's happening, but just sit in it. The second thing I think about as a leader in this moment is reinstigating that practice of making asks and making offerings. So I only make more work for myself and I mess up more often if I'm just guessing and winging it. So instead, my assumption is because I have this mixed team, they are having a mixed experience with the results of the election. So I can ask, I can say, how is this landing for you today? Right? I don't answer for them, meaning you're scared, right? Or like, I'm sure you're furious. Like, I don't tell anybody what they should be. I just try to open-ended ask, how are you doing today? Recognizing that grief and celebration are both nonlinear cycles, right? So how stuff is dropping in and offers. Here's an idea of what I think we could do or try. Here's what I think we could do externally. Here's what I think we could do internally. And please, what are some offerings you might have some ideas about what we as a company could do to support our clients, our customers, and each other that haven't ever occurred to me, right? So how am I receiving asks and offers as well? So these aren't just sessions to vent or complain or process. I don't know what any of those mean, and I don't know what the goals are. So it's saying, okay, do you have some asks? Do you have some offers? I have some asks. I have some offers. Number 3 for me, I call time off for real. We have got to actually make it possible as leaders for folks to take the time they need to be well enough to work. I promise you, having the walking wounded emailing clients is like not a great idea. We're gonna mess up more. We have slept less. We are hurting. We are excited and we haven't slept. We are distracted because there's so many possibilities, right? Either way, there's just a lot of input and data that's sort of happening and reactivity. And so for me, time off for real is making a plan with your team about how they need to tell you. So text, Slack, phone call, email, and doing things like, okay, so if you're not going to be at that meeting and I know you're out today, I will take notes, even though we don't normally take notes in that meeting, because then you're caught right up, right? It's your job to get back into the fold, but it's my job to actually make it possible tactically and tangibly. Like, hey, on your out of office, go ahead and send them to me or go ahead and send them to somebody else on our team, right? Here's how we're still going to get the job done, but tactically what's possible. So how do you really talk through? I promise needing to sleep in does not mean I think you're weak or incapable. It does not mean I think you are irresponsible or high maintenance, right? And so it can be helpful as a leader to also model, which is part of why you and I have decided we're taking the day off, because we know already we're going to stay up real late on election night. We just know that because there's a lot of races in a lot of states we're following as a national company that's paying attention to the whole US landscape, right? So it's like, you and I are going to be tired.
Right,
we should also have the day off, right? And then fourth, the one that's in my awareness right now is also revisiting, resetting boundaries. So I'll do a really tangible example. On our team, it is really inside of boundaries to express passion about what we care about, right? What is outside of our boundaries is ever talking about or disparaging the looks or physical appearance of any candidate ever. And we know that part of the way is the internet gets snarky, folks start to dehumanize people who don't share their values, is around height, weight, skin color, makeup, jewelry, class, haircuts. And no, that's not how we do business at Team Dynamics, right? So we might say, we get to be passionate, and here's where the edges are. Right? Here's what we expect, so that we don't have to spend a lot of time like editing or being careful. We know exactly where the edges are, rather than we trip into it with each other and get embarrassed or get in trouble. And so for me, empathy, asks and offers, figure out time off for real, and be clear about your boundaries inside of such a catalytic, passionate moment.
Oh, I love that. And thank you so much for that list. And I think what I am getting enthusiastic about is the fact that those are relevant both in grief and celebration, like you said.
Yep.
These are not the disaster scenario tools. These are we are having big reactivity and activation about a mixed set of results on a mixed identity team. So thank you so much for that offer, Trina. We would love to hear from you on Twitter about how you are practicing some of these tools that Trina's talking about. Send us a tweet at Behave Podcast. Thanks so much for hanging out. Wash your hands, wear a mask, and make good choices. Oh, it's like so close, but I don't.